Hello and welcome to a tour of Gilbert White's house. My name is Kimberley James. I am the Collections and Marketing Manager here at Gilbert White's house. And as we're in lockdown and the house is currently closed, although hopefully soon we will be able to open it up, I wanted to show you around Gilbert White's house. Now, you'll see there are a few things, like this chair behind me, that are wrapped up. This is because whilst we weren't here every single day, we didn't want closed moths to take over the house and eat everything that was either our natural history specimens or our historic fabric furniture. So we've been monitoring them, but we also made sure everything was safely packed away so that we still had them when we came back. So we are currently in the room that we call the little parlour. Now, Gilbert White's house is quite a large house today, but when Gilbert White first came to this house as a child in the early 18th century, this house was really quite small, and the room that we're in right now actually is the original part of the house. So it would have started at this wall and would have ended at this wall, with some rooms behind us here and the front door right in front of me. The room is right on the road. It's quite a busy road in today's Selborne, but in the 18th century it would have been a very quiet road where really the only traffic would be people coming to and from the village. So as I said before, this house, this is the original part of Gilbert White's house. When this room was first built in the 17th century, the roof would have been the rafters and it would have been single story. And then before Gilbert White moved here in the 1720s, this floor was added, so it was now a two-story building. There are a few things in this room that are not original. The first thing is the staircase. That is a Victorian addition. The archway that takes you through to the current front door is also a Victorian addition. Gilbert White's door would have been directly. And the room to my right is also a later addition. It is a Regency room. It was actually added just on the cusp of the 19th century as a dining room, so wouldn't have been here in Gilbert White's time, and is now our orientation room. So it's the first room that visitors go into and sort of describes the stories that they're about to learn, and visitors might recognise it as the old tea parlour. So one of the most important features of this room is the portrait of John White, which hangs just over the mantelpiece next to me. John White was one of Gilbert White's numerous brothers and sisters. He was every bit the naturalist that every member of the White family was. He served as chaplain of Gibraltar. His son, Jack, Gibraltar Jack, as he's often referred to, lived in this house during his adolescent years and was really a son to Gilbert. Gilbert reared him through various illnesses, was very instrumental in Jack's schooling, and Jack went on to settle here in Hampshire, first in Alton, and then he went over the border into Wiltshire to settle in Salisbury, and is actually mentioned by Jane Austen in her letters. There is a mention of a Dr. John White, which is our Gibraltar Jack. The other thing to mention in this room are the two pictures that are currently behind me. These are illustrations done by Samuel Hieronymus Grimm, who, besides having one of the best names I have ever heard, was the original illustrator of the natural history of Selborne. Gilbert White invited Grimm to Selborne to illustrate his book, and Grimm spent a lot of time taking studies of various places around the village and even slightly outside the village, and created these wonderful, beautiful snapshots of what Selborne looked like in that time. And not only are they beautiful pieces of artwork and make up a lot of the engravings that are featured in the Natural History of Selborne, they also give us a really fantastic insight into what Selborne looked like in Gilbert White's day. Through Grimm we have glimpses of the vicarage, which is where Gilbert White not only was born on this day in 1720, but where he would have spent a lot of time as the curate to various different vicars in his career, and would have been a building that he would have known really well. Unfortunately, it no longer exists, so it's really nice to see that building and what it looked like. Through Grimm's drawings we also get a feeling of Gilbert's garden, and I'm not going to say any more because we have talks by both Keith Oakley, our current gardener, and David Standing, who was our gardener for a long time and was very instrumental in the recreation of Gilbert White's gardens, who will tell you all about what we learned from Grimm as far as how Gilbert's gardens actually looked. Hello, we are now in the Great Parlor, which is right next door to the Little Parlor. And when I said when we were next door about the original Gilbert White's house being sort of wall to wall, when Gilbert first moved here as a child, the house in Gilbert White's latter life actually went from the far wall of the Little Parlour to this wall here of the Great Parlour. So everything further this side, so Bell's Library and the Discovery Room, and everything above us, which are the Oates Galleries, are later Victorian and Edwardian additions to the houses and would not have been here in Gilbert White's time. I quite often think that Gilbert White must be looking down on us all thinking, this is fantastic, they must think that I was absolutely loaded, because this house really is not representative of the curate's house that would have stood here in the 18th century. But whereas all the other rooms were either added after Gilbert White lived here or before Gilbert White lived here, this is the room that Gilbert White built. He built this in the 1770s, and we have a pretty good account of its creation. The idea for the room was based on a similar room built by Gilbert White's brother Henry at his vicarage at Fifield. And this room really is a room for socialising. It's something that we don't really talk very much about Gilbert White's life, that he was an incredibly social person. He liked being the host. So in this room he would have hosted his nieces and nephews and family members, of which there were many, and he also would have held parties. You know, he would have had people round all the time, and this is the room that he would have done that socialising in. And there's nowhere really in the house that could have served that purpose before. So this really gave him the opportunity to do what he wanted to do, which was be the host and really sort of be master of ceremonies in Selborne. We also know that building this room was remarkably similar to building works in any century. We know that he had issues with the builders. He contracted the builders, who then couldn't start until well after Christmas. He tried to save money, so we know that he shaved his dog Rover and used the fur to thicken the plaster. So somewhere within these walls is Rover's hair. And we know that afterwards the room was a very pleasant place to be, and in fact Molly White, who is in the portrait just over my shoulder here, in one of her letters talks about what a pleasant room is turned out to be. It's not quite the same as it would have been in Gilbert White's time. It was extended in the 19th century when the first floor was added, and a bay window was taken out and a much larger one put in its place. But you definitely get the feel of this room, and one of the most remarkable things about this room is the view. It really would have been the main feature of this great parlour. You've got a fantastic view of the lawn, the sundial in the middle, just on the edge of the ha-ha, and then the mead and the park and the hangar. So this would have been somewhere that was as much about the outside as it was about the inside. Now, I have turned the camera around because one of the biggest features of this room as it is currently is the bookcases. Now, these bookcases are full of just one book, and you might guess what it is. It is, in fact, the Natural History of Selborne. One of the amazing things about Gilbert White's book is, although his name is not very well known outside the field of natural history, although the book The Natural History of Selborne is by no means one of the most read books in the English language, it is the fourth most published. And what I mean by that is it has been in continuous continuous state of published since it was initially published in 1789. It has never been out of print and has been through not countless but hundreds of editions since that point, which means that it's very easy to fill up some very, very large bookcases both in this room and in other rooms around the house, and still know that there are additions to be had. But I think this is the room where you really get a sense of just how important the Natural History of Selborne was. One book published by a never published before writer on natural history, but not natural history as it had been done before, sort of, you know, it was done in a epistolary form, so in a letter format, just about one very tiny village in the northeast corner of Hampshire, and yet it really skyrocketed to fill these book shelves with Victorian editions, Edwardian editions, later 20th century editions, and is still found in most good bookshops today, and long may that continue. The books that it beats, well, the books that beat it at being in print longer are the Bible, the works of Shakespeare, and John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and I really think that that is quite the achievement, and it shows what an important figure Gilbert White is, not just scientifically, but also in the literary world. Now, not all of these books are in English. Now, one of the wonderful things about Gilbert White is, even though the subject of the natural history of Selborne seems like something that is fairly specific, it is really a global book and has been published all over the world. I'm not going to go in too much, because if you look on our channel, there is a video about our current temporary exhibition, which is Gilbert White Around the World, and I go into some detail about all the exciting international books that we have. But this is my favourite object in the museum, this rather non-assuming looking copy of the natural history of Selborne. But what makes this special is that this is Gilbert White's copy of the natural history of Selborne. And not only that, it has a fantastic sort of story behind it because of what it is bound in. It is actually bound in the skin of Gilbert White's pet spaniel, Fairy Queen. Yes, you heard me. It is bound in the skin of a spaniel. Now, as we know, that Gilbert White was an animal lover, and I often try and akin this to sort of the later fashion of stuffing people's beloved pets. Clearly, Fairy Queen would have died of totally natural causes, and this was a way of keeping a beloved pet close to you after their death. And this isn't the only time this happens, because there is actually a Bible belonging to the White family that is also bound in the skin of a beloved pet. So this clearly was a White family tradition, only used for the most important books, such as family Bibles and your first ever book. Hello again. We are now in what we call the old kitchen, but before we even start looking around this room, full disclosure, this probably has never ever been a kitchen. In fact, it definitely wasn't. Likely there was a kitchen in another room, out this, what would have been a door in this little alcove here, out to a sort of out kitchen, and this most likely would have been Gilbert White's dining room, but there isn't really as there wasn't another room in the house to be that to serve that function. The room is a lot lower than it would have been in the 18th century. When you enter down some stairs, and actually the room in the 18th century would have been on that level, and that's obvious when you look at things like what would have been the door out of the dining room, which now is a sort of strange little alcove that doesn't really seem to serve any purpose. It also makes sense when you think of the proximity of the kitchen and the dining room to the well, and to all the other outhouses that were all out towards what is now the stable yard. It just makes sense that this actually was the original dining room. However, in this interpretation of Gilbert White's house, it is in fact his kitchen. So we are now currently in Gilbert White's bedchamber, which looks very different to how it would normally look. This room is usually kept very, very dark, despite the fact that actually it gets the best light in the entire house. And that is because usually hanging on this bed are the bed curtains, and the first thing that we did when we closed was pack up the bed curtains so that they would be safe, as they are remarkable. It is astonishing that we have Gilbert White's bed curtains, and they are superbly beautiful. They are hand embroidered. The story is that they were embroidered by Gilbert White's aunts, and they have kept their colour and vivacity for nearing 300 years. So they're not currently up on the bed, and this is probably one of the first times that they haven't been on display for a very, very long time, and I'm very much looking forward to putting them back up very, very soon. But this room is probably the most rich for items that we know did belong to Gilbert White, besides the bed hangings. And so I just want to show you around the room. Because this room is so dark and because it's so small, you don't usually get to see some of these items up close. So hopefully this will be a real treat. I am now currently sitting in front of the suite and between two chairs that belonged to Gilbert White. This one next to me is currently covered because it has a fabric seat, and this one here is a really beautiful chair. I'll show you up close, but it's got some fantastically beautiful carvings on it, and these are things that we know Gilbert White owned and were in this house during his life. So I am now talking to you from a room that would not have existed in Gilbert White's original house, but was added around the same time that the Regency dining room was added. So this is a very early 19th century addition to the house, but would have been a strange addition for Gilbert. This room has quite a few purposes. We call it the Gilbert White room. It sometimes is a conference room, but we also have bookcases in here full of more additions to the natural history, a display of books which changes quite a lot, and it is also home to our portrait of Thomas White. So the first treasure that I am going to show you is this bound manuscript, which is very relevant to us here at the house at the moment, as we have been turning Gilbert White's brew house back into a microbrewery. We've been thinking a lot about Gilbert White and beer, and anybody who knows a lot about the personal life of Gilbert White is that he did enjoy making beer, drinking beer, talking about beer, but also making raisin wine, as well as buying wine to drink himself. So this here is Gilbert White's brewing book, and I'll show you a close-up. So this brewing book is basically in Gilbert's own words, an account of the brewings of strong beer, a chronicle of strong beer and raisin wine. It starts in March 1772 and carries on all the way through to the end of Gilbert's life. So the next treasure I have here is one that is, I think, really special. I think so much of what we have of Gilbert White's and so much of what we know of Gilbert White is from sort of the latter part of his life, which is what makes this really quite special. So this is a 1700 copy of Terence in Latin, and what I will show you is that it was actually one of Gilbert White's school books. He has signed the front. Gilbert White, his book began March 30th, 1736, and what you get by looking at this book is just how many doodles there are and how many other names. So just looking at the front here, I can see another Gilbert White who was probably one of Gilbert's nephews, not our Gilbert writing his name again. Doodles and some squiggles, who we have no idea. Looks like a Henry Ashbourne wrote this. Somebody has written the word misfortunes a couple of times. Maybe they weren't overly happy with the schoolwork that they had been given to do, but what I think is clear about this book is that Gilbert White was not the last to use this as a school book, and considering when it was published, there is a chance that he also wasn't the first. So this is really part of the White family legacy, and a wonderful insight into the adolescent Gilbert White, and I'd love to think that some of these doodles were Gilbert's doodles. So the next treasure that I have is a pamphlet. The pamphlet is called the Topographer, and the reason that it is so special is this particular pamphlet, which specialised in local history, is one of the first reviews of Gilbert White's Natural History of Selborne. So this issue is from April 1789, and it has a review starting on page 40 of White's Natural History and Antiquities of Selborne in the county of Southampton, with engravings and an appendix. I'll just read you the first couple of sentences. It is a part of our plan to notice all new publications that illustrate the topography of the kingdom, and the first book upon this subject, that is our province to review, becomes a very pleasing talk to us, for a more delightful or more original work than Mr. White's History of Selborne has seldom been published. So I think we can safely say that this one is a good review. This next treasure is really exciting. It actually is part of the manuscript, and if you read a copy of the Natural History, you'll probably see this right at the beginning. This is actually the advertisement to the book, sort of an introduction or to the piece. And I really personally like Gilbert White's advertisement to the Natural History of Selborne, because I think he sets out what his objectives for the work really were. And although he is, trying to explain himself, I think he puts it really, really succinctly in this paragraph right here. If the writer should at all appear to have induced any of his readers to pay a more ready attention to the wonders of creation, too frequently overlooked as common occurrences, or if he should by any means through his researches have lent a helping hand towards the enlargement of the boundaries of historical and topographical knowledge, or if he should have thrown some small light upon ancient customs and manners, and especially those that were monastic, his purpose will be fully answered. So this is the last room I'm going to show you as part of the Gilbert White tour, principally because this is the last room that we have that is really linked to Gilbert White. Beyond this starts our exploration into the Oates family in the rooms that are not part of Gilbert White's original house. But this is a really exciting room because this is his study. Now, we don't know whether Gilbert White actually used this room for a study. Very likely it could have been a bedroom or really used for any purpose, but for our intents and purposes, this is Gilbert White's study. And this room is another really exciting room of Gilbert White treasures. So I will take you through them. So I think the most exciting thing about this room is the fact that next to me here is Gilbert White's desk. Now, how important is desks to writers? And it is incredible to think that on this desk the Natural History was edited, the letters that make it up were written. This is where Gilbert White would have written his sermons, as well as his family and friends correspondence. This is where he probably wrote his poetry as well. I mean, we haven't even gone into Gilbert White as a poet. So it's really, really, really special for us to have it. And in true Gilbert White style, he had his initials and the date carved into the desk, so we know that it was definitely his. You'll see that pop up quite a lot around the house. But so there you go, GW 1755. Here's the desk in all its open splendour. One of the things that always strikes me about this desk is how large it is. We are only a couple of miles away from Chawton, where Jane Austen wrote all of her novels, and if you've ever been to Jane Austen's house, you'll know how impossibly tiny her writing table was. And so it always strikes me this is very much a man's desk, a man with a career that he needed to write for. Obviously he was a clergyman, so he was writing a lot of sermons, doing a lot of administration work, as well as writing his correspondence, his poetry, so this would have been a real focal point of his life. He would have spent an awful lot of time here. So that pretty much concludes our house tour for this Gilbert White 300th online birthday festival. We are hoping to open the house as soon as we can, and when we do, we really would love you to come and explore this house yourself. There's only so much that you can try and give over camera. Really, you need to come and see for yourself. This place has got a beautiful atmosphere to it, which I really want to be able to share with you properly, rather than just through your laptop or other device screen. So if you can come and visit us, please do. Keith Oakley, my colleague, will be giving a garden tour at 2 o'clock, and between that we've got some really exciting talks coming.